Welcome to the Success Ascent. Today we are joined by entrepreneur, business owner, coach, and author Patti Mara. Patti is the author of UpSolutions and comes to us from Ontario, Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, she shared a number of things in this great interview, and I will leave you with this before we jump into the ascent. She says, turn your team into heroes, customers into fans. I know you'll enjoy the session today. On to the ascent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Success Ascent today. My name is Pat Mancuso, and I'm excited today to have a guest with us from Georgetown, Ontario, Canada. It's our first Canadian interview here, and very, very excited today. Canada's not much farther north from me out of Minnesota. So I'd like to welcome Patti Mara, and I want to give you a little bit of background on Patti. Patti is an author, entrepreneur, coach. Her company, Marinette Company, is out of Georgetown, Ontario. And she's going to share with us today some strategies around the crisis that we're all involved with and how do we survive and thrive through that crisis. And in fact, she shared harnessing crisis to drive your growth. So I'm excited today. So welcome, Patti.
Thank you so much, Pat. Thank you. It's really a pleasure and privilege to be on your podcast and connect. So thank you for having me.
Well, so Patti, talk a little bit about your background. I mean, we talked a little bit as we started, and there were some commonalities in some of the circles we travel in. So how did Patti get to where she is today?
Oh, great question. Well, I'd say I didn't grow up in an entrepreneurial family, although there was an entrepreneurial bent, if you will. And like creating organizations or products or programs within company structure. My first venture was actually when I was in university and I got a student venture loan. I pitched to a table full of bankers and I designed and made t-shirts and sold them on the streets of Toronto.
I love it.
So turns out I loved designing, making, finding a manufacturer, getting all that organized. I hated standing on the streets of Toronto trying to hawk my wares, although there was an interesting culture at the time. And so that was kind of my first venture. And then when I graduated from university, it was the late 80s. And we were during a recession. It was the first time middle management were actually laid off. I mean, I remember the headlines, IBM laying off managers for the first time in its corporate history. And it was technology was starting to shift how organizations operated. So I had to figure things out. And I tried a number of different ventures, and very quickly, I was being pulled to do retail training. I was really good at helping business owners and team members position what they had to offer in a way that the customers appreciated it as value. And so I just kept getting pulled into it. And so that really, but again, I didn't have a lot of knowledge on how to build a business. And of course, 1997, I came across Strategic Coach, and that was a pivotal shift. Whereas, the whole idea of leveraging the entrepreneur and the business and creating the infrastructure with a unique ability team, it just literally exploded from there on. So, and as you said, Pat, I mean, it's like, so I'm now one of the coaches with Strategic Coach. I've been in it since 97. I know Joe Polish. I've been in Genius Network, and there are a lot of common threads.
Well, and both great individuals, and they say that you're the sum of the 5 people you hang out with, and so those are some great people to hang out with. So you wrote a book, and as we were talking before we started today, just like the rest of us, you had a plan for 2020, and the book was part of the plan, and timing was such that the book came out and then the plan got changed. So first, let's talk about what did you experience going through that? I mean, we've all gone through these adjustments, and yet people have gone through them differently. So with your background and how you lead others, how did you adjust? How did you initially make those adjustments?
Yeah, great question, Pat. So as you said, I had a plan. The book was published the end of January. I had a book launch. I was booking into podcasts. We had all of these marketing going out. And then of course, March hit and lockdown. And so it was interesting. I followed my own methodology. Was the first thing, then crisis hit, is I got in touch with my customer base, which were entrepreneurs. And so I just started getting on the phone, Zoom meetings, and finding out where were people at. And I talked to people that were essential services and their business was expanding, but they still had to change how they interacted with their customer base. But the demand for what they did was expanding. And not always what you would think, like more expensive options, but they were expanding. And then, middle of the road, that they were minimally operating, and how were they going to organize and be profitable, like a restaurant, for example. And then also business owners that were completely shut down.
Yeah.
And, multi-million-dollar companies. A good friend of mine, 1,500 team members on payroll, and event management business that went from, multi-millions to zero, literally overnight, because there are no events.
Sure.
Right. And I think everyone thought in March it was going to be a couple of weeks. I was planning on a couple of months. And then it was actually Microsoft that came out in the end of March and canceled all in-person trainings until June or July 2021. And that was like ding, 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 ding. So how are they adjusting? So in answer to your question is, I got in touch with my customer base and who I work with and who I focus on. And what I found, a couple of things. One is that my messaging in the book were more relevant than ever, but some of the languaging had to change. Like what I focus on. The first chapter in my book is the opportunity and change. I just kind of had to bring that forward and emphasize that more.
And the book title for folks is UpSolutions. And so you keep going. I just wanted to get that plug.
Yeah, UpSolutions. And my favorite is actually the byline, which is turning your team into heroes and customers into raving fans. Wow. I think even before the impact of this year, the business impact of the global pandemic, even before we had that, businesses were being squeezed. They were being commoditized. The impact of the internet, global marketplace, the big box stores. And what I found is that most business owners are playing the wrong game of business. They're competing on price. They think their business is what they sell. And my argument is their business is the value they create. So they need to know who their customers are. What do they need? What do they want? What's important? How do you position what you offer as a solution? And then your products or services are just a vehicle, right? So that was kind of all my messaging going into this. One of the two interesting things that came out of the conversations I was having and my observation of what was happening in the marketplace. The first is the idea that crisis interrupts all patterns. And so when you think about crisis interrupts all patterns, there's a huge opportunity for that. If you're dealing with a consumer marketplace, then, once we make a decision, we don't want to change it. We'll keep going to the same store. We'll order from the same site. We don't want to read it unless we're given a reason to. But all of a sudden, all that's out the window. So if you're out front positioning why choose you and how you're going to make their life easier, all of a sudden you're gaining lots of business, like you're literally on the forefront. So crisis interrupts all patterns on multiple layers, our habits, who we do business with, our buying, all of that. So there's an opportunity in that and there's a challenge in that. And the other thing that I noticed is that I've been talking about there are significant trends that are putting increased pressure on businesses, especially independently owned businesses. And there are things like mass customization. I think one of the hottest business models is the subscription business model. But the real one I've been focusing on is this whole idea that there are new business rules. And if you are playing the old, the wrong game of business, if you think it's what you sell, if you haven't adjusted to that, you're not focused on sales, you're focused on solutions, and you're not focused on transactions, you're focused on relationships. If you haven't made that shift, if you're not clearly communicating why choose you from all the other options, then you're being squeezed out of business.
Yeah, you're just a commodity.
You're just a commodity. And where you could get by in 2019, you were being squeezed, but it was still there. In 2020, you're done. It accelerated existing trends and forced change that people were kind of holding on what they knew.
Well, it makes sense, right? So when you talk about that client value, that client enhancement, give us an example of what that might look like for a small to medium-sized business owner in any business that you've dealt with.
Great. All right, a couple different examples. I'll start with one of my favorite. This is actually a story in the book, is that a friend of mine decided he wanted to put up a shelf in his office. So he goes to one of those storage stores and he goes in the aisle that has shelving and he's looking at, floating shelves. And the young clerk comes up to him and he said, can I help you? And my friend Dan said, no, I'm fine. Now, the fact that you're approached and someone says, can I help you, is fabulous. And this young clerk, Dan is standing in the shelving aisle and he says, what kind of wall do you want to put a shelf up on? Now Dan's engaged. Right. So
different question, different result.
Different question, probing question that Dan doesn't even know to ask. So he said, well, it's a drywall. And then the young clerk says, what do you want to put on that shelf? And Dan says, books, maybe a little knickknacks. And then, so the clerk comes back and says, well, for that type of wall, what you want to put on it, this is my recommendation. And he shows him why. It's going to anchor in, you can put the weight on. And so Dan walked out of the store with an $85 shelf, happy with his purchase. He had been looking at a $25 shelf. So better for the business, but better for the experience and client. Because if he bought the $25 shelf, it would have fallen off his wall. And then he would have just thought, this is a cheap store. Right. So one of the rules of thumb is that your customers don't even know the questions to ask to make an effective buying decision.
See, that's a great point. Will you state that again?
Your customers don't even know the questions to ask to make an effective buying decision. This is part of the byline of my book, Turning Your Team into Heroes. If your team understands this and they're trained, I have what I call the UpSolutions recipe for your team to understand, what do they know about customers, or because they work day in and day out, they're experts compared to the customer. So what do they already know when they walk in? And therefore, what questions do you ask? And then what recommendation you make and why? And then how do you build an ongoing relationship, not a transaction, but you're now building a relationship. Very, very simple, slight shift, but this allows the team to be focused on educating and offering and being heroes, which they love to do, get to win in their role, make a difference. And customers, literally, you're now a solution provider. I think every business should be focused on building trusted solution relationships with your customers.
So in the book, you talk about maintaining your customer focus through educated observation. What's educated observation? First time I've ever heard that.
Well, and that's, I would say that the recognition that a team member who's worked in the business for 3 months or more is an expert compared to their customers. So if you understand that, then as soon as somebody comes in, you know more about that person than they may think to tell you. For example, I've worked with a lot of independently owned pharmacies. And so if somebody comes in, a patient comes in and they hand a prescription for a diabetic medication, that the technicians, the pharmacists know more about what's going on with that patient than the patient does. They don't even know where to start.
Sure.
But if you're just filling a prescription, you're doing a disservice to the patient. If you're not offering a probiotic when a antibiotic is presented, right? A prescription. There's a good story about a pharmacy owner who was in the pharmacy one day, and a patient came in and wanted a refund on her antibiotic. And so because the owner was there, he did it. And he said, we don't normally do this. We don't refund medication. And she said, well, I just had, all these side effects, diarrhea, all this stuff. I was just so uncomfortable. And the pharmacy owner said, if you'd been taking a probiotic, you probably wouldn't have experienced those side effects. But it was her response that set him back, and why he remembered it and why I know the story is she said, I wish someone had told me that.
Wow.
If you're not educating what's possible, you're literally ripping off your customers.
So this seems very common sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what holds business owners and businesses back from adopting this type of mindset?
Oh, you know what, Pat, that's just a great question, because that gets to the core of the issue. I read an article years ago called A Curious Phenomenon that literally stated, because we are all customers in multiple businesses, we are experts at customer service. We know what we like, we know what we don't like. but it all seems to go out the window when we step across the counter and are the one delivering the customer service,
I love that.
right?
Yeah.
So the key here is putting yourself in someone else's shoes, developing the awareness of, I like to distinguish between customer service and customer experience. If customer service is what you're doing for customers, the customer experience is how they interact with that. How does it land for them? And it's developing the skill and awareness. It starts with a mindset shift. As soon as they're aware, team members want to do this, but they've never been trained. So they're focused on the task rather than the result.
Interesting. So when you've gone and you've obviously gone into companies and you've implemented this, what's the biggest hurdle from their mindset perspective? So the business owner says, hey, I love this, let's do it. And you go in and what do you get a sense from the actual people who are delivering that product or that service?
I don't find a lot of resistance. I mean, every once in a while you come across team members that are not the right fit, and but that's a different issue. But if you've got an engaged, right fit team, then they're all over this because it really sets them up. Nobody wants to sell. They don't want to feel like they're selling.
Right.
But by creating value, by providing solutions, and their job is to educate what's possible, so they have a choice, so the customer has a choice. They're all over that. And if there isn't an infrastructure to set the team up to win, which I can, regular communication, team huddles, that the team member knows not just the tasks of the role, but the standards for the role. If you don't have that infrastructure in place, then it won't happen consistently.
Okay. So when you look at value, how do you help companies determine that value? Because everybody, like, you talked about, we have this perception of value from our perspective, and yet we've got to have them have a different perspective of value, right? So like, what are one or two things that you do to help companies define that additional client value?
Love it, because you're right. We take it for granted.
Right.
Right. We completely take the value for granted. It's easier to focus on what we're doing.
Right.
And so, which is our features, what we're offering. And we have to pay attention to the benefits created and why that's important. So the first thing I recommend is identifying your customers. Who actually is your target audience? And it's interesting. We all know to do this, but I found very few companies and have actually sat down to define what's their best fit target audience. Who are they? What are the demographics? What's important to them? So my first thing is identify the who. You can do that, from who you enjoy working with, they value what you offer, and they're willing to pay you for that. And as well as pulling up your financial data, who's buying your most profitable products, who's your repeat customer base. Right. So you pull all that and identify who and describe them, but then I recommend you get in communication. Okay. Why did they come back? Why did they choose your store? What do they really appreciate? Would they like something else? Is there something missing they'd like more of? Right. But identify the who and then get in communication with them. And they will tell you why they choose you. And that's the value you create.
Well, there's two things that you talk about there that come to mind. And I was in a conversation with a business owner yesterday, and the first thing is not everybody is our customer. And I tend to think that sometimes people, let's take an insurance agent, a real estate agent, who may be solopreneurs and yet many times are building businesses, and they think the whole world is their target market. And yet the ones who are highly successful really define that avatar of that client. And then, as I was talking with this gentleman yesterday, he went to, in this case, he was a real estate broker, and, he's got over 200 agents in his company. And he actually, we coached and consulted him to go get feedback from his clients who were within business right now to find out how could he attract others. And the agents were so embracing of that, getting that feedback model. So that's really what you're talking about. And it just so powerful.
People love to be heard.
Right.
We have a need to feel heard, and very few times is like we're usually talking over each other. So if you actually ask someone their opinion and they really appreciate you as a company, they They want to tell you. They want to tell you what they like, what they don't like, what they'd like to see more of. And if you're embracing of that, it's the most important. I call it your customer gold mine. It's the most important market research, and we miss it.
So you're an entrepreneur, and as entrepreneurs, we all struggle. We all have our challenges. What's something that you've met as a ceiling and broken through, and how did you do that?
Oh, love this. I am really good at coaching. I'm really good at getting underneath what's the shift, what's the mindset, how to do it, what's the structure. Like, give me something and I can coach it. I good at identifying the need and the, how to get the end result. Love it. I'm horrible at marketing. And of course, this year has been all around online marketing. So that's a whole different. The thing about online marketing is it's incredibly powerful, and everything has to work perfectly within seconds. There's no wiggle room.
Right.
You can track everything to see where you're going, but it's not my talent, not my focus. Don't have a lot of patience for it. So I hired a company, and they're doing it all for me. I'm just actually about to launch my funnel for my business reinvention blueprint program. Again, create the content, deliver the content. Yeah, happy space.
Right.
Build the funnel, not so much.
Yeah. Well, and that changes by the minute. Like what was working or what was powerful a minute ago has now changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about the UpSolutions, what else would you say that's really powerful about that model that you haven't shared with us yet?
So the idea of UpSolutions is that you're identifying who's in front of you, what's important to them, and how do you create value for them. And I love the term. It was actually a pharmacy owner I've worked with, Chris Cornelison, who coined the term UpSolution, because he had his team really resisting, literally offering probiotics when a antibiotic is filled, offering if you're on any type of maintenance medication, you're dealing with some kind of nutrient deficiency. So offering recommendations of supplements, so his team was resisting it because they felt like they were being forced to sell, and they're in a healthcare field. They want to feel like they're taking care of people. And that's where he came up with UpSolutions. And it is 180-degree contrast to upselling. Upselling is, would you like fries with that? So how can I get you to pay more? Not what you need, but how can I get you to pay more? How can I bundle that for you? UpSolutions is all about the customer. And by identifying the customer, what's important to them, and how do you create value for them? How do you literally better support them by educating them what's possible they didn't even know about? That's where you turn clients, customers into raving fans, because of you become their complete source for whatever it is you offer.
So I want to shift gears a little bit, Patti, and let's talk about that, because we started with kind of the crisis and how do you take advantage? What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? And I don't know what the numbers are like in Canada as we're talking. However, in the US, obviously, we're seeing a little bit of an uptick. And I know business owners are starting to worry a little bit. Are we going to go back into that, that shutdown or limited capacity? Are you seeing the same thing in Canada?
Yes, on a much smaller degree.
Okay.
So our numbers are on a much smaller degree, and we've had more strident, like we've had mandatory mask laws for a while. Some parts of, I'm in the province of Ontario, so Quebec, it has the highest numbers, but we're talking, I think we're at 62 or 64,000 total cases in Quebec, and maybe 40 some, maybe it's higher than, more like 50,000 right now in all of Ontario. So the numbers are on a different scale.
Right.
But saying that, we are increasing. We're all in this second wave, right? Globally, other than I think the Asian countries, we're in the second wave. And so there have been some restrictions that have been increased, like, anything that has you be inside in a closed space, that you're breathing each other's air for an extended period of time, that's being limited. But otherwise, we know so much more.
Right.
We know
Right.
how it's transmitted. We're not the fear of the spring.
Yeah.
We know how it's transmitted. We know what the risk is. We know about masks. And so I'm really hopeful that governments don't go into lockdown.
Right.
I really think we're at the point now that we know how to we know how to treat it, so it's not escalating. Everyone's not in the hospital on a respirator. So I'm really, because I think that's the key thing. And if we all just do simple things to reduce risk, then we can keep our businesses open, because we're at the point now that our real danger is we close down our economy,
Right.
because we're really shutting down businesses.
Yeah.
And
There's no more room there.
there's no more room there. Good, well-managed businesses have a rainy day fund. It's done.
Yeah. It's gone.
We're done. So do people need to be pivoting? Yes. Do you need to look at what's different today? What can, a different way of looking at the crisis and change of this year is, what can we do this year we couldn't do last year?
Right. And there's a lot of things.
There's a lot of things we could do now that we couldn't do last year. And so what's the opportunity right now? What is this showing me that's actually positioning on my business for the next 10 years of growth?
Right.
But if we go into full lockdown again, we're in a different ballgame.
Absolutely. So what's the best advice you've ever been given from a business perspective, if you may?
Funny, we talked about, my current favorite book, and it would actually be my current favorite book, which is Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy's new book out, literally hot off the press, Who Not How.
Right.
And Dan in the Strategic Coach program came up with this idea 2 or 3 years ago, and it literally changed the structure of the program. And the idea behind Who Not How is that entrepreneurs, idea generators, innovative thinkers, you need to be focusing on, what is the innovation? What is the opportunity? What's your idea? And then immediately go to who can do that for you rather than how to do it. If you're an idea generator, the moment you get into how, you bottleneck the whole process, and you probably won't do it nearly as well as it could be done anyways.
Right.
And this is, for me, this is even more relevant. My team is virtual. I use Upwork a lot. I've got a web guy in the Philippines. It's like, we have a global access to resources if we get out of our own way, thinking that we have to be the one to do it. So as soon as you have an idea, who rather than how.
I love that. So let's flip it upside down. What's the worst advice you've ever been given?
I have to be good at everything.
Right? Simple, right?
It really, I would say it's the flip of that. And there was a period of time that I thought I needed to be good before I handed it off to somebody else. No, I have to be clear, but I don't have to be good at it.
Right. I love that. I love that. Well, I was going to ask you for your book recommendation, and you already put that one on the table. So, and as I understand it, just an awesome book. I follow Dan a little bit, and Benjamin Hardy, the co-author. And so I'm looking forward to reading it. I haven't had the opportunity to read it yet. So thank you for sharing that. So as we kind of wind up, Patti, what would be a final thought, a final impact statement you would share with our listeners?
Embrace the opportunity and change, and with grace. I think, I'm an optimist, and I have been challenged this year. Just because I'm not seeing the number of people I used to see, I'm not, all of the stuff around the isolation and the movement that we're not able to do this year. So it's kind of embrace the opportunity and change back to what's possible this year that wasn't possible last year, and have grace with ourselves.
Yeah. Because
that for me is making sure I get enough sleep. What am I doing to make sure that I'm nurtured and I'm taken care of? I read an article about COVID brain, that we're literally, this is unprecedented. This is an unprecedented experience in our lifetime. It's really easy to shut down. Yeah.
Well, and we're human beings, and human beings, we're created for human interaction. And I know for me, I'm kind of in that same boat, having been around thousands of people on an annual basis, and helping them transform their lives face to face, and now that shifted, and it creates different opportunities. And you're right, we've got to take care of ourselves first, so we can pour into others. Well, Patti, you know what? Thank you so much for sharing. I'm the UpSolutions, ladies and gentlemen. If you don't have the book, please go to Amazon and purchase the book. And we're going to post at our website the opportunities for you to get in touch with Patti. And so, Patti, we just want to thank you again for joining us on the Success Ascent.
Pat, just an absolute pleasure. So thank you so much. I love the message. It was a great interview. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So ladies and gentlemen, be safe, be healthy, and be powerful. Have an awesome day. Take care. If you've not yet subscribed, please go to your favorite podcast source and subscribe to the Success Ascent, or simply go to www.thesuccessascent, and that's ASCENT.com, thesuccessascent.com. Thanks so much for joining us today. We look forward to catching you on the next Ascent.